John Shaffner, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
I appreciate it, Dan. Always good to see you.
Uh, let's see, I have not interviewed you before, but our colleague Joel Littman has had some convos with you. I know he had one conversation with you at our conference in Las Vegas, which was interesting. Um, I think I was about 3 drinks in at the time, so I'm not going to say I remember what it was about, but I remember enjoying it very, very much. So,
Everything's better at that point, you know?
yeah, yep. Um, so when I sort of started looking into what you're all about, I don't know if I want to talk to you about military stuff or if I want to talk to you about what you do at MBO Partners. Maybe we should do both, a little of
That'll
both.
work. I luckily have a depth of knowledge in both.
Okay, good. Um, Actually, the topic of war has been on my mind a lot lately, and I want to bounce some things off of you. And I I was reading about NATO, and I was reading about the history of it and sort of the situation in Europe and the Ukraine Russia war, and I was just I knew nothing about it, so when I read that NATO is basically a defensive organization and that they bombed a European capital for 78 days in 1999, Belgrade, Yugoslavia,
Mhm.
I thought, that's not defensive. And it wasn't a NATO country, and they hadn't attacked a NATO country. And that led me to looking into more, and I was just kind of shocked by how far off the mission they got. Um, and I wondered if a guy like you, I knew we were going to be talking to you, and I wondered if a guy like you had a viewpoint about that. I know you were deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan, so maybe you don't have a view of Europe, but I sure would like to know what you're thinking about that.
Well, I'll tell you, from so when I joined the Army in 1998, we were
Hmm.
in the middle of the Balkans issues, right?
Yeah.
And I got to my first unit, and that unit was deployed to Bosnia. And then shortly thereafter, we got deployed to Kosovo. We didn't do anything kinetic then. We were, the Army aviation piece didn't. We did a lot more security operations, so kind of more traditional NATO operations. But Europe since then, if you most Americans don't, we don't pay a lot of attention to it, right? If you look at the map
You're
of
right.
Europe in
Right.
1998 and the map of Europe today, you'll see some kind of stark differences, right? Different,
Yeah.
even countries. And we didn't, no American thinks, wait, there's countries that have changed in the last 20 years in Europe.
Yeah.
We usually think of Europe as France, Germany, UK, right? Maybe, depending on your background, maybe some Spain, maybe some, Nordic countries. But Eastern Europe has been in flux since post World War II. So if you look at the why NATO was formed, to protect from the Russian hordes, and then at the fall of the Russian hordes, we didn't dissolve the protective relationship, even though at the time we thought Russia was going to potentially even there was even discussion of Russia becoming part of NATO at one point. Granted,
Yes.
it was very short lived, very short
Yes.
lived. But we can talk about investing in Russia, but let's save that for another time.
Yeah.
But yeah, the NATO organization has been, in some senses, a protector of Europe. It depends on which side of the line you're on, but it definitely has a significant interest in Europe. So they have their articles of protection where we all the ways we protect each other, but also that European interest where NATO might act a little bit or stretch the foundational documents a little bit to do things that they feel are good for the NATO members, right? So
Hmm.
it does have a little bit of a broad edict if you look at how we've applied it over the last 70 years. So
Right.
it's interesting, and our interests in Eastern Europe haven't changed much. Our presence has. If you look at how back when I first joined, it was just after the Cold War had started to the Cold War had started to cool because it didn't warm up. It was pretty warm for a while,
Mm.
but it started to cool. So our presence, moving into Poland and other strategic spots in more Eastern Europe, changed kind of the perspective. And then as we add more members, and then most recently,
Mhm.
our members up north, it really has changed the circumstances quite a bit. But yeah, so it's been something that has had a foundation in European security, and that has taken a lot of different definitions over the years. I think that's what's driven some of the changes and differences that you've seen
Yeah.
as you dig into what it was originally formed for versus what it is today, which is sort of back to what it was originally formed for, but there's that period in there of flux. So it's like any international relations, pretty complicated.
Yeah, it is complicated, and I don't know. I was disturbed by what I learned. I was disturbed by recordings of conversations with um, like Victoria Nuland from the United States, who they were like there was a recording of someone from the United States, actually two people, her and the I think the was it the Ukraine or Russian ambassador, talking
Mm-hmm.
about how they wanted the Ukraine outcome to be in 2014, like who they wanted to install in the government. I was shocked. I mean, you
Right?
hear about these things going on, but you don't get to hear the conversation happening. And it blew me away. Like I listened to it again and again and again. I was like, they're moving chess pieces. It's like something out of a movie.
Yeah.
It just shocked me. I just have to say, maybe I'm naive. You're probably more sophisticated about these things. Certainly more sophisticated about these things than I am. But I was just shocked. It blew me away. Anyway, so what I'm afraid of though is that the U.S. through NATO's machinations are going to get us into more trouble, and that there's always the potential for another, Vietnam or Afghanistan to develop somewhere in the world, just because of the way that the U.S. like we think we're the world's policeman, and before you know it, thousands of Americans are being killed over a period of decades, actually,
Mm-hmm.
in these places, for what, to replace the
Right.
Taliban with
What,
the Taliban. It's just
so that's the thing. I always say, and I think I might have said it at Stansberry last year. But now that I'm out of uniform officially, I can be a little more open with what I think, to an extent, right? Because I still have to remain employed. But
right.
you know, what I always say is prior to World War II, and this is a generalization because you can find anecdotes, but prior to World War II, and for World War II, we fought for something. Like you had a war for a purpose, right?
Hmm.
And that post World War II, we have gone to war for a purpose that is not the same as prior to that. So a lot more ideology is involved in the purposes in which we go to war. Now going to
Hmm.
Afghanistan, the purpose was obvious, right? We got we were attacked, and that was our response. And then you
Hmm.
roll in the Iraq War, which the circumstances in which we went into Iraq were disputable, right? The facts that we believed at the time may not have
Right.
been the facts on the ground. There were a lot of people that contributed to that, and a lot of people that get excited. And when people get excited, they don't make great decisions. To include Saddam Hussein, right? He was a little excited and said some things that he maybe shouldn't have said. And then our response was, again, excited. And then we said and
Right.
did things that maybe we shouldn't have done, in retrospect. Um, for example, in Afghanistan, I was there in the very beginning, and literally in the beginning, and we get ready to move out, and they brought in a larger unit, right? And we were thinking, what are they going to do? It's like, what are we going to do more here or bigger, right? And we all, us smart captains at the time, we were young military men, but we'd been in this thing and we'd seen it for 7 months, and we learned the country, which Afghanistan is a country unlike any other, like all countries, but this country was especially unique. The graveyard of empires, they call it that for a reason.
Mm.
And we said, well, if we come in, at least at the minimum, we need to build a road between Kandahar and Kabul, kind of the main two power centers of Afghanistan. And we all agreed, all the smart captains and majors agreed. And admittedly, some of those majors are now like retired three and 4 star generals, which is really funny. It makes me feel old. Which, looking at my picture in this with good lighting, makes me feel old as well. I had to figure out how to have a better makeup guy
Yeah,
or
I
a
mean,
makeup guy. But I come back there. I'd gone to Iraq 3 times after that Afghanistan trip. So I
mhm.
show back up to Afghanistan 8 years later, and I was at General Petraeus' headquarters, so at the highest levels, the theater command headquarters there. And the discussion was, so how are we going to build this road between Kabul and Kandahar? The, and I just walk into that conversation, and I literally am like, what have you been doing for the last 8 years? It's like, what guys, but we
Yeah.
kind of sort of moved in that direction, never finished it. And then, yeah, it's interesting. And then we left, obviously the circumstances are pretty, you know, dire and egregious, circumstances that we left, and our continued relationship with Afghanistan is puzzling, is about the best word that I could use in this podcast.
All right.
Without bumping your rating up, but it's just we still maintain a relationship with our former enemies, but that's another conversation. We do that all over the world, but it's what was that war for?
Yeah.
And that begs the question of, since, if you look at it since World War II, you talk about Vietnam, you talk about Iraq, you talk about Afghanistan, you look at Libya, you look at a lot of the countries we've gotten ourselves involved in. What was the war for? And that's not something you can clearly define, right? It's like, oh,
Right.
what do we get out of that? It's interesting. I go on for a long time talking about being in Iraq and the oil field support contract, right, for the southern Iraq oil fields. Didn't go to an American company, and we're sitting there guarding this, right? So it's like, well, why wouldn't we want to align those revenues back to America? Like, this, something you
Yeah.
go to war for. You want to at least have something to gain. But
Right.
it's very interesting, uh,
All right.
the way
Well,
that we.
John, I don't want to get you
Yep,
fired. So maybe I don't want to hang on this topic and get you fired.
right.
So let's just,
Yeah.
maybe we should um, talk about, what MBO Partners is. Maybe just give us a little, overview and tell us what it is and what you do there.
Sure. So MBO Partners is a very interesting business. They're one of the businesses that works behind the scenes with a lot of big companies that you may have never heard of, right? What MBO Partners does is they work with contingent workforce model. So if you look at
Hmm.
the way the workforce has been changing, in the United States, there's a lot more independence. I'm not talking about Uber drivers and DoorDash guys and that kind of contingent work. I'm talking about professionals that are billing 100, $200 an hour to do strategy work, to do uh, large scale program management, those kind of things. You know, as IT and AI and all these things have made doing things more effective for a person in an office or in a business. It also has
There are a
gotten
few
more
of those
cost.
people in Washington, D.C., aren't there? Just a
A
few.
couple, yeah. And we can talk about the Washington Tech 100 at some point if you want, because that's, if you look at what that is, it's like, oh my gosh, everybody's headquarters moved into Northern Virginia and DC.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, so MBO provides a contingent workforce for those folks. So it allows me, especially on the federal side, to engage with literally hundreds of different companies about, when you start talking about people and workforce, you really get behind the curtain on how the company's health is and what they're thinking and kind of where they're looking strategically when you're talking about where they're going to deploy people. So
Hmm.
that's what I've been doing the last couple of years at MBO Partners, is really looking at um, helping these companies build a better workforce model to deploy against growing requirements on the federal side.
Right. A lot of defense or no?
Yeah, so obviously, defense spending is the largest section of the
Sure.
budget that we can choose to spend, right? So the Defense Department has picked up a ton of cyber, a ton of IT integration. They're really working to modernize a lot of things. If you peel back the onion, the U.S. government still runs on a whole lot of mainframe computers. So that actually has become a really specific specialization, because those folks have kind of aged out of the workforce in a lot of cases. So how do you maintain these giant mainframes which you have to have them healthy if you want to move them to the cloud. You want to put the old garbage on the cloud. It's definitely a boom right now. If you look at where government spending is, and then healthcare, same story. A lot of the IT backbone for a lot of the federal programs and companies and federal supporting agencies has been, uh, you know, left behind in the tech boom of, we'll even say, the late '90s. Given the continued reliance on mainframes.
All right. So I always, it's funny. I mentioned, there might be a few of these people in Washington, D.C. Um, and I always wonder, what the hell did they actually do? I mean, really, what do they do? And I'm sure a lot of people think that way. A lot of people think, how are you, you talk to a guy, there's something in the suit in front of you, but you're not sure if it's even a human. And you're just like, how does this person get 100 or $200 an hour? And I
Right.
just, I can't ever put it together. Like, you don't know what somebody, can do, but people make impressions. I worked in Alexandria for a few years in the late 80s. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just kind of worked in publishing. I was able to use a software program that was becoming more popular at that time. Um, and so we were publishing like what's called the electronic data interchange standard. And, just worked around that for a few years. And so I wasn't like a high level guy, but I wound up working at like um, defense contractors and places. And the one defense contractor gig I had stood out because basically you showed up and they said, whatever you're making an hour, we're going to pay you more because we need you right now. And you can sleep on the couch and you can stay here as long as you want, but this shit has to be done. And don't bother me with the details. Just get this thing done by, X time frame. And I was working with this other woman on the job, and like we didn't leave the place sometimes for like 48 hours or something. Um, and it was weird. And the folks I was reporting to didn't seem to know a lot. That was the thing that got me. The amount of time they said, I don't know, but I just need you to do this. It was always, I don't really know, but I need you to do this. So my question then is, having encountered these people inside the company who didn't know anything, at least on one occasion many years ago, admittedly, like, is that why people are charging $100, $200 an hour? And if so, why not just hire the $100, $200 an hour guy?
Right.
Yeah.
Here's kind of the, I'll get to it. Right. Our government spends, 5+ trillion a year. They spend it, right? It's not investing, it's spent. Of that money, 600 billion, give or
Mm-hmm.
take, goes to contractors. Now, some of those contractors build stuff, but a lot of those contractors are pro services guys, are IT guys, or strategists, or other administrative type of assistance to the government. So what we tend to do, because the government isn't a business, we spend money. We never really worry about returns. We worry about effects and impacts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right.
but I think what really drives not the value, but the spend is we change the goalposts all the time. So hey, we're going to go this way, and we're going to go to the cloud. Like we started that a couple years ago, and then oh my gosh, how do we go to the cloud? And you have to bring in cloud people, which make a good amount of money. Um, and then you start down that path, and you realize that you have to fix your data and fix your inputs to get it ready to go to the cloud. So there you're spending a couple 100 million fixing that, and then you're bringing in technical folks that do things that the military folks don't understand. They just know they need to do it, right? Because somebody told them they did. And that's how a lot of the spend happens is, oh, we want to do this. And then somebody like you that's an expert will come and say, well, before you do this, you have to do this. And then, oh, shoot. So now that contract is put on hold. We roll a bunch of money into another contract and
Right.
let out another couple 10, 20, $50 million. So you understand scale. I did a enterprise IT integration, a very small organization, 600 people. I realized that I needed about $16 million to do this, right? To do a clean data integration. You know what I had to do to get that $16 million? I had to find it in like unspent money. And I said, hey, I want that $16 million recoded to me to do this. And that took one question to the right person. And all of a sudden I had $16 million to spend. And I went to a contractor and I said, hey, this is what I need. And they said, yep, we'll do that. And there you go. And I spent $16 million like that because I knew what I needed. No, and they knew what they needed. But I knew technically what we needed. So I built the program around it. And it actually ended up being a really good implementation. But that doesn't happen that often. And even now, that was 8 or 9 years ago, they're still working through the implementation and change management of that original contract. So that's how you end up with all these very highly paid people because they know what they want, they think, they don't know how to get there. And as long as you have somebody with at least a minimum level of technical knowledge, they can move in that direction. But a lot of times you don't have somebody with technical knowledge, so they'll fits and starts. For this project in specific, we had 2 major consulting companies that had consulted for $5 to $7 million a pop on designing a solution. And then when the implementation came, they're like, oh, we don't have any money for that. So they'd spend another $3 or $4 million defining the solution again. So that's how you get all this crazy spend in the government and not necessarily the value out of it, right? So that's, long story longer. That's kind of where I've seen the government work, and the efficiencies of the government are the efficiencies of the government.
Right. Efficiency of government sounds like an oxymoronic phrase.
It is.
Yes.
I can say that, and I think maintain my position.
Yeah,
It's pretty defensible.
What's coming to mind for me right now is what percent of government spending is inefficient?
Right. Well, so that begs the question, right? So, like it's an investor podcast, where the big question that I'm working with the altimetry team is, if we take that $5 trillion the government spends every year, at what point does some of that, or what a part of that, becomes investable, right? Which part is really an investment? Where is it going to be a place where a company or the government organization is going to find a value or return? Because if you look at, large platforms is one thing, right? So, F-35, that's a lot of money, and that almost died on the vine several times. But it came through. If you look at some of the programs and platforms that the Army is pursuing right now, Future Vertical Lift, right? The cool next generation V-22 helicopter that can take off vertically and then turn into an airplane, right? It's like some Transformer stuff that got funded, right? And there's a big, futuristic bunch of helicopters that came that were brought forward as potentials, and the government paid for most of that experimentation to get there. Now they've got this thing, right? And now we plan on implementing and building that program out and start delivering it by like 2028. But it's 2024, right? Am I going to see, is my kid, when he joins the Army, like he says he wants to, who knows, is he going to be flying that thing? I wouldn't even flip a coin on it. Like, I don't know if I'd make that bet, but it's kind of how the government works. It needs significant political backing. The products now, the bigger they are, the more broad they are. So the more people are involved in it. So you build an F-35 and I think it has a component in all 50 states to include all of our international partners, throw a little piece into it. So imagine all the businesses involved in building this very complex thing that has to fit together in a very precise way. Efficiencies of the government, right? So it's a very interesting problem set. And like I said, trying really hard to figure out how government spending is something you can bet on in the short, mid, and long term as an investor. So it's giving that perspective, talking to the altimetry guys, it's been a very interesting problem set. And I mean, we've definitely made some ground on it. And it made some pretty decent recommendations, because if you look, there are companies that have their fingers in a lot of it because it's so broad, and there are winners and losers out there. But it's interesting. It's a very interesting We'll call it a battlefield. You can call it an industry.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. That
Yeah, the
one.
pluses and minuses of government contracts. For the real output, there's a lot of inefficiencies, but also from the investment level, like
Yeah.
those companies are locked up in those contracts, and the government is locked up
Right.
in them for
Yeah.
however long.
We can talk about. I mean, not to get into specific companies, but there's major American aircraft manufacturer that has a lot of trouble on the commercial side. That's doing okay on the federal side. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wonder who that is. Um, so, like, John, I want to get as sort of as granular and detailed and intimate as you'll allow here. What does your, day, week, month, year kind of look like? Like what are you personally focused on in the business?
So right now with MBO, I'm trying to find companies that um, have a need for a contingent workforce that realize that need. Now, what I've found is
I'm
every
sorry,
company
for what?
for a contingent workforce. So like
Contingent
they're
workforce.
different.
Okay.
They're different contract types, right? And
Hmm.
whether it's a short term or long term contract, short term you need to really specialize people for a certain duration, which makes sense to hire them in a contingent model versus do like some companies do and hire. For example, there's a large consulting company that I've worked with that is literally has about 3 or 4 million a year in spend on people sitting on the bench, right, waiting for a contract to win. Because contracts have a schedule,
Hmm.
but the government rarely follows that schedule. Like for example, that the aircraft I was telling you about.
Hmm.
They say 2020, 2028. I think it's out to 2030. So I mean, it's a sliding scale, right? If you're looking at a professional services contract, it may be a $500 million integration contract. Well, if that aircraft, which is on a separate contract vehicle, moves to the right, and then you've already awarded and delivered the cash for the integration of an aircraft that has yet to exist, you're burning the money, right? Or if that company has started to hire ahead of need and that award is pushed out as well, so they're having to sit on 30, 40, 50, 200 highly paid individuals. That's kind of where I'm looking at. It's like, hey, you're sitting on this revenue drain. I can provide you a revenue, more of a revenue positive, revenue neutral solution to this problem. That's really what I spend my day looking for is finding these companies, and then the ones that do have uh, a current need, and they say they don't use a contingent workforce. I said, well, let me take a look, right? And in every instance, I've found where everybody uses a contingent workforce, SMEs, subject matter experts, specialized engineers, specialized IT folks. They use them, but they're hiring them directly at the PM level or at the VP, the ops level, and it's not visible to the company at large, which is a inefficient, kind of use of that talent because business unit A and business unit B need the same thing. A has a line on it, B doesn't. B spends, talent sourcing is plus 30%, 40%, depending on how you source it. While, there are other business units sitting on that talent and not using it, right? So I try to connect the dots there, and that's really where I try to create value for the companies that I'm pursuing. And at the same time, I learn a hell of a lot about, government contracting and where the money is being spent and isn't.
You know something, John? I as a guy who did not go to business school, um, and who knows that some things come out of people who did go to business school, like when they're talking about investments, that I just scratch my head and I don't know what they mean. Um, I guess I'm starting to get the feeling, oh, maybe some stuff they learned in business school really is worth something because, you know, that's what it sounds like. It sounds like I'm getting this sort of um, how the stuff you learned in business school is actually worth something in the real world. It's the 101 of that.
By God, you hope so. So the benefit that I had, I was going through business school. At the same time,
Uh-huh.
I was going through the Army's Advanced Planners course, which is kind of like the business school for the Army. Like in
Mm.
business school, you go in the nuts and bolts of processes and manpower and administration, all those things. And then on the military side, you go into the nuts and bolts of how you build a task organization, i.e., what kind of a force is needed to do a certain job. You want to have efficiency because you only have so much stuff. You want to do the most with it that you can. And by going through those courses at the same time, it's given me a very interesting perspective on the industry now, where I look at these military problems, and then I look at the resources that the military has and that I know they have, and where they're trying to get to. And then there's that gap, right? And how do you fill it, right? You can't fill it by increased manpower, because you've seen how well we're doing with recruiting. And if it's mid or senior level people, well, you got to take 10 or 15 years to build them, right? So then you try to bring in a contractor, which is a retired military person, to kind of fill that gap. But for how long and in what way, right? When we rolled out, you guys remember the Stryker vehicle? Back in the middle of Iraq, Afghanistan, it was a wheeled armored vehicle. It looked like a Marine Corps LAV. 8x8 was an awesome truck, right?
Okay.
Really fast, really capable. Well, the Army didn't have anybody that could actually fix it. So GD Land Systems, we can say this because it's in the past in the news. Mm-hmm. There was a coup for them, because they not only sold us the vehicle, they sold us all the maintenance schedule to fix that vehicle for a good number of years, until we had trained up the military force to be able to fix that. So that's the kind of contracts, if you take a look at, it's like GD Land Systems had a big win there, where they made not just the money from the truck, but also the money from all the parts, all the labor, and all the personnel to fix those things around the world.
Does somebody in your company specialize in eliminating waste? I'm just curious because I'm sitting here thinking, John must see, like when you told me that one part from every 50 state thing, I was just like, You're kidding me. And I, as you're talking, all these things I'm putting together in my head, I'm like, John must see so much waste that he just, that might not, it's like not part of your job. So you got to push it on somebody else. Does that guy exist? I mean, or is the government just not interested in that? There's no place for such a person.
It depends on the administration, the time, and the budget, right? So if you have money to burn, which, we're in one of those time periods where it seems like we might, we definitely don't look at it that way. But when things contract, then you start finding, trying to build efficiencies, right? So that's short answer to a challenging question is, does the government need that? Yes, they do. But does the government have that? Oh, certainly they don't.
Okay.
Well, they have it in name, but in effect, I'd mention.
No, but I'm asking specifically at MBO Partners. Does someone specialize in creating efficiencies for clients?
So really, so efficiencies for clients. So yes. So our workforce model is very much in line with that. So creating efficiencies in their manpower flow and their personnel flow, their talent finding exercises.
Okay.
For sure.
Thank goodness. This had to be a major piece of the business, or else there's something wrong with the world, right? I mean,
what do you find that? Yeah.
Go ahead, Corey.
What do you find are the biggest needs of the companies that you're interacting with right now? Like maybe one or two surprising things that most people might not understand.
So, on the technical side, right? Data, big data, moving data, using data. A lot of federal contractors and the federal government at large are not good at using it. They have a ton of it, right? So as an example, we were flying helicopters and we had these sensors in the helicopters that were testing vibrations. And they were trying to get it so you could take these vibrations and determine when a part or piece was going to go bad on the helicopter. Because normally you say, when you design a helicopter, okay, this piece has 100 hours in it, this is 1,000, this is 3,000, whatever. But they're trying to go more towards a condition-based replacement because it's expensive. Because especially when you're flying, like in combat, we flew the hell out of the airframes that we had. And we were finding that some parts lasted longer than we thought, and some didn't last as long as we thought. And finding by failure is no way to really find something, right? Especially in something that involves the third dimension and helicopters, which a helicopter doesn't like to fly. It just doesn't. Like an airplane, you shut the engine off, it's going to glide. It's going to continue to fly for a little bit. A helicopter, you shut the engine off, it's going to land somewhere where you're looking down. Like that's pretty much where it's going. It's not going very much further. So we try to do this, right? And this was before, the compute. This is early 2000s. We didn't really have the computing power to really determine this. So we had all this data and all this experience and all these things, but we didn't really have a way to use that to create value. Now we're getting there. Now we're realizing that in the case of a lot of the things where we thought, well, this wouldn't work or this doesn't work, we found that we have the data on hand. We can go back and analyze it and fix it and clean the data and come to some really good conclusions. So that's really the biggest, not the biggest, but one of the bigger spaces where I see a lot of requirements coming out against is data management, those type of things. And then the intelligence side, it's even bigger.
The intelligence side. Well, now you've piqued my interest. I mean, what can you even say about that part of the business?
Well, there's a lot of sources of intelligence, right? So you have your people, your human intelligence. You have all your signals intelligence. You have all this stuff that comes out in the public domain from social media, all of the data surrounding humans, right? And then how do you find, like you see in the news, the guy that was just arrested out west for that was going to conduct the attack on election day, right? That was a data problem. I mean, granted, the guy ended up trying to buy his weapons from an undercover FBI agent, but that FBI agent needed to know where to be and how to contact that guy. They didn't they didn't set out a line and start fishing for him, from the beginning. He just kind of fell into that circumstance. You hear about that all the time, but that's really data analysis where they use a lot of available intelligence data and find people that are looking to do bad things.
Okay. Well, we all want to find people looking to do bad things so we can avoid them or arrest them or whatever our job is. So, John, for some guests, I don't have to ask them to do a lot of work. I just want them to talk, and I've wanted you to talk and just sort of, tell me what's on your mind and very freely express yourself. But I'm going to have to ask you to do a little work now.
Sure.
Because at this point in our conversation, I'm pretty sure our listener is saying, my head's kind of swimming. Like, we've talked about some specific things like the FBI example, and the helicopter and various things that you've discussed.
Big government.
Right, big government. We all understand, and the proliferation of consultants and all the rest of it. But I'm willing to bet that many of our listeners right at this point are saying, wait a minute. I still don't completely understand what this guy does for a living. Can you make it like really concrete for them?
Sure. What I do right now is I provide personnel solutions, right? If you have it's usually a technical or a high level administrative need. I help you fill that need. So looking at administrative.
And I'm usually, and when you say you, I'm usually government, or I'm usually government adjacent.
Government adjacent. So we don't go direct B2G, at least not much, just because the government wants to solve, so government contracting has taken a turn in the last couple of years where they're, instead of going for specific small contracts, they put together these giant overarching contract vehicles where, if I need HR help, if I need IT integration, if I need all these things, I can go to this one contract vehicle, which is it's kind of like a store, right? And I can find somebody that is a winner of that contract vehicle. So there's, a large contract will have 5, 6, 7 winners that can provide these services. So I decide what kind of service I need. I go to my contracting office and say, hey, I have this need, and they'll help me craft my contract that goes to a company, right? And to deliver that. So when that company gets it, they're going to have part of the people, right? And part of the specialties to do that. So what I do is I look for those opportunities to help them fill the rest. Because when you're doing these contracts, and a lot of them are task orders that are time bound, so 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 3 months, right? They can't go out and hire against this because, number one, their hiring timeline is usually pretty long. And number two, I have access to literally 100,000 contractors worldwide that can potentially fill these roles. So they'll come to us and say, okay, I have this need, and then we fill that gap for them for that period of time so that they don't have to go and, hire. And it's it's good in a lot of ways because one, you get specialized talent that wants to work for you. Because when you hire an independent contractor or a consultant to help you out, that person is motivated to help you. They're not a, I mean, nothing against the W 2 worker because I am one, right? But a W 2 guy, and this is in the government and in some commercial instances I've seen, the day you're hired, that person is always already on the job site looking to level up, right? Especially in the cleared space. If you got a top secret clearance and you're in it, you know, 100K or 80K, you know that you can jump yourself to 120, 150 with a little bit of experience because you already have that clearance, right? So the nice thing about a contingent workforce is you're not, you know that they're tied in and interested for that period of performance to get that contract done. And that's the value that I provide is providing you that workforce that's going to do that job and stick around, you know, for the duration of the contract. It's a common thing. The last year of a contract, like if it's a 3-year
I see what
contract,
you're telling me.
yeah,
I see what you're.
year three,
So the
everybody
W two
leaves.
guy, he's hired, and as soon as he's there, he wants to move up and do something else. But the contractor guys, you know, they're going to stick to the contract and get it done, and not be angling for another position. Maybe.
Right, way more likely because they want to do business with you again, right? They want to be on that next contract, maybe a little higher rate, but they're very interested in building a good relationship with you. If they hang you out to dry, if you're the company and the contractor leaves, are you going to hire them again? Probably not.
Right.
So,
and you have a Rolodex of 100,000 of these people around the world.
Yes, that MBO's got actually over 100,000 now.
Wow.
So we work with commercial and government, everything.
Yeah, how does a person who wants to be a contractor get hooked up with you guys? Like, how does that process work?
So our website's a good place to start. You know, hit me on LinkedIn, especially if you're a military type of person or a government type of person. Hit me on LinkedIn. But I've got a book behind me, how to literally soup to nuts on how to be a government contracting independent consultant. It's easier for the non-government commercial side, but it's there's a process out there. We help people do it on our website, and then you know, and then sometimes I've helped probably about 100 people do it in the last year, you know, myself.
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, it's a good opportunity for a lot of folks. They just don't know that the gig economy is a little bit bigger than some of the, you know, classic instances.
right. Yeah, yeah. You hear about the gig economy and, you know, freelancing and whatnot, but to get in that contract like people hear contract and they're like, all right, well, what do I do after the end of 1 or 2 years?
Right.
But if you're saying you get hooked up over and over again, if you actually do the work.
Yeah, these contractors, the ones that are successful, they'll have 6 or 7 clients. So they'll do 2-3 months with one guy, 2-3 months with another girl, you know, whatever, just to build their book of business, so they're not, you know, tied or over risked to one separate company or one company.
That's interesting. That's an interesting way to think about that. Most people think they just want to get a job and get with one company and stick there. Like that's not a risky thing. Like there's no risk in it.
Well,
they
yeah.
feel safe
You look
with
at
that.
you look at, well, even you know, Gen Xers, right? Our duration, our common duration with a company is like 4 years. There's very few people that are spending an entire career with one company, especially in the professional side. You see a lot of folks bounce around, and then you get, you know, Gen Z and younger. They really are looking to, you know, kind of turn a little bit faster. They don't have as much allegiance to the company like we would think of. Like, I'm a booze guy, I'm a PwC guy, I'm a whatever. I'm going to work here for a little bit, and then I'm going to bump up at the next one. They're much more, you know, nomadic in their pursuits.
Right, and I just want to. I want our listeners to know when he says not a booze guy, he's not talking about drinking excessive amounts. It's
right.
Booze Allen Hamilton.
B-O-O-Z.
Yeah, Booze Allen Hamilton. I've recommended them in the Extreme Value newsletter. They've done well.
Yeah. Well, in Vegas, Dan, we can talk. I've got some good insights for you.
All right, can't wait to hear it. So okay, so thanks for that. Thanks for just helping me, you know, just make things more concrete for our listener. That's really what we want to do here. You think Like, what size is MBO? Do you think it'll ever go public?
So I think we're on our second private equity company.
Okay.
It has. I mean, honestly, there's a lot of green space, right? I think it could go public at some point.
Hmm.
It should go public at some point. Um, there's some things that need to happen with industry, like if you look at our MBO is the largest source for research on the independent gig economy. Like we do a thing that's called
That's good.
uh, we have an annual report that's kind of the state of independence is what we call it, where we talk about, hey, this is what
That's
the
cool.
independent
How did I
workforce.
not know this about you? That's
Oh
awesome.
well, that's why I'm here. That's why you have me to talk to.
We're learning, Dan.
I
Yes.
know.
So yeah, the state of
Okay.
independence actually
Yeah.
should come out in October. So this year's will come out and it'll give you an idea of where the independent workforce is growing, is contracting, kind of the health of it. But what we found, I mean, really consistent in the research is it's been growing immensely since even pre-pandemic. Pandemic was definitely a shot in the arm. And
Mhm.
then if you look at the independents, the independent contractors, the people who have done this, they're actually healthier, wealthier, and happier as they build out their personal business. So it's, the Miles, our CEO, has actually started talking about, there's a new social contract, right? The social contract isn't with, the business, it's with the worker. So the
Mm.
worker has to be able to take their benefits with them, right? And then we help independents do that. We have different programs in place. But you really, as you look at it, you're not going to work. You're not going to get a pension. I mean, who has pensions anymore other than the military? And I appreciate that. But who has pensions anymore? You got to be able to take your benefits and take them with you, and build a system that when you bring somebody into a business, whether it's a new hire or a contractor, you have to be able to contribute to their livelihood, in the long term, not just providing them a job in the short run.
Makes me feel really weird. I've been at Stansberry literally longer than absolutely everyone, um, arguably including Porter, because he left for a couple of years.
Right. See, Porter's got
I've
a
been
break
there
in
every year.
service. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's got a break in service.
Yeah. So, you know, so not everyone is like me. Lots of people not like more than
I
ever
mean, I
are
did
not like
25 years in the Army, so I'm with you, Dan.
me. Yeah, yeah. Wow,
Yeah.
I
25
thought
years,
I'd do
really.
6. Yeah,
Did you retire full bird?
I did.
Nice. My brother retired lieutenant colonel, Marine Corps.
Yeah,
If he hadn't hurt
I
his
meant
back, he
to
wouldn't have
retire then, but I didn't. I forgot.
done it. You forgot.
Like pretty literally, it's like, oh my gosh, now I'm a colonel and now it's 25. I think it's time now.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you mentioned the possibility of your son
Mhm.
joining up. How do you feel about that
Well,
as a choice
I
for him?
think he'll have a lot of the advantages I didn't have. Like I was the only member of my immediate family to serve. My grandfather served in World War II for a couple of years. He peaked at E5, so he started at E1 and ended at E1. Peaked at E5, so you can tell he
That's
was the kind
funny.
of soldier that I would have had trouble with.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't even want to ask, like what
Right?
got him
Yeah,
busted back.
his stories it comes very clear very fast. Just put it this way: before he joined the army at 16, he lied about his age. He was a leader of a gang on Long Island.
Oh, Long Island. That's where I'm from originally.
There you
Where
go.
part?
Oh, was it by Rockaway? I think.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So he said by Willie Mays' house, wherever that is. That's where he grew up.
Yeah, it sounds
Okay.
about right. Okay. Yeah.
All right.
That's how he described it, by Willie Mays' house. But yeah, and then he became a civil engineer, started an engineering company, did great. But yeah, he got all of his wild oats out of him in the Great World War.
All
Sounds
right.
like
I
it.
wanted, while we do have you here, I do want to ask about, the current wars going on right now,
Sure.
the major ones. We got obviously Russia, Ukraine, and then what's going on with Israel and everything, Iran in the Middle East.
Yeah.
How do you, is a hard question to answer, but how do you see this progressing? You go through, whatever developments every other day, but where does this end up?
So the trend, right? If you look at, we'll, we'll start with the easy. I don't want to say these. Neither of them are easy. Neither of them are easy. But with Ukraine, I think we've reached kind of the end game with that. I'm guessing 18 months we'll have it all figured out. And my call is that Russia will maintain the eastern territories in Crimea, I believe, and they'll kind of just redraw the lines, right? And Ukraine will become Kiev, surrounding areas, Odessa, and then Russia will maintain that. Now, that position isn't without risk for Russia, just given the fact that Ukraine is getting a little bit more capable. But both are really running out of resources. So I think that one we reached the end game, and I don't think you're going to see anything huge, right? Because the manpower, the capability just isn't there. With Israel and Iran and proxies, very interesting. There's nothing stopping Israel from, I won't say eliminating, because it'd be hard to eliminate, but at least making ineffective Hamas and Hezbollah. Nothing is stopping Israel from expanded operations in Lebanon. I think that will continue. I think the interesting part of that, and I think at the end, Gaza will go back, probably a UN mission in there. West Bank is a big question mark right now because they've done some, but not a whole lot there. I don't know where that one's going to be. And I think the West Bank folks have seen the things to the north and south and are kind of, self-regulating and keeping things, even keel there. And for the most part, historically, that's been one of the lesser risk areas because you don't have Hamas or Hezbollah there right now. I mean, you had the PLO for a while. That's kind of, softened. I think that will be, I think we'll continue operations into Lebanon for another, 6 months. But that one's definitely tipped hard, in the Israelis' favor. Now, the wild card is the Houthis. The Houthis have been causing a lot of trouble for a lot of people. And what people don't realize is their attacks in the Red Sea they've been very specific, right? If you look at the amount of traffic that they've interdicted or they're fired upon, there is a method to their madness. They're not shooting at everybody. They're shooting at either Israeli flagged vessels, companies that do a lot of business with Israel, a lot of things that are aligned with Israel. So they've been very targeted. And they've actually increased their operations in Iraq and kind of more in the area. So the Houthis may take the place of Hamas and Hezbollah at some point. I'm not sure because they are geographically tied to Yemen. So that's a consideration because of the strategic importance of Yemen, vice the Red Sea. There's a significant, international, global, shipping risk there. So I think that is an interesting thing to watch in that conflict. Is Iran going to get into a shooting war with Israel more than they have? I don't think that's in anybody's best interest. I think Iran's going to double down on the Houthis because of their effectiveness and kind of their ability to stay outside the fray and still affect global shipping, provide them a bit more of a lever than Hezbollah and Hamas, which were very focused on Israel. That's kind of my take there. I think the big question mark for me is what becomes of the Houthis and how does that how does Yemen end up in the greater Arabian Peninsula Middle East kind of structure, right? How do we respond to that? We Americans, we NATO, we global community. What does that become? Because just a few years ago, Saudi Arabia was launching their Apache helicopters into Yemen to shoot Houthis. They're not anymore, right? So it's that one for me is very interesting. I don't think anything's going to stop Israel from greatly degrading Hezbollah and Hamas capability. I mean, you've seen a masterclass in counterinsurgency in the last 3 or 4 months. I mean, everybody on this side is like, why couldn't we have done that against ISIS? Or, I I mean, but
Yeah.
we don't have the Mossad or all the other units that Israel has, and the timeline that they've been working on to penetrate into that infrastructure. So that's my take on the global ones. Like I said, the big one for me is what becomes of the Houthis, and how do they play, on the world stage as the other, kind of proxies are degraded.
All right.
Very interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the latest thing we have, or I've heard at least, is you have the Iranian president and Putin scheduled to meet soon.
Yeah.
And I presume they're not talking about, Major League Baseball playoffs or anything like that.
It could be like, they're just having a birthday celebration, like, North Korea. But it's interesting, and then, the reports of North Korean soldiers fighting in Ukraine is also of interest. But I don't see there being a lot of appetite for that internationally. I think we can shut that off, through different actions. But I don't know. That's a wild card there. It's not as big a wild card as the Houthis, but I think it's a wild card for the Ukraine conflict.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that. That's crazy. Wow. I thank you, John, for being here and for just letting us kind of pepper you almost randomly with questions about your current business and your past career and what's going on in the world. I appreciate you're accommodating our wide-ranging questions. But it is time for our final question, which is the same for every guest, no matter what the topic, even if it's a non-financial topic, same identical question. And if you've already said the answer, by all means, feel free to repeat it. So just take your time if you need to. But the final question is simple for every guest. If you could just leave our listeners with a single thought today, what would you like it to be?
Yeah, I had an answer to this, but it was given our discussion, I've rethought it. I think my answer to that would be is everybody should be comfortable that the United States is still in a position of power and influence in the world. What we need to be careful of is how we wield and use that power and influence, and if it's in the best interest of both this country and other countries that are involved in those decisions. So I think as you look at, because it's election season and all these, I don't know if this is coming out before elections or not, but as we look at how we view our place in the world and what's important to us as Americans, I think that people need to really consider what's important and how to create the best position for ourselves that also allows other people to thrive. Because once you really shift that balance of power and you exploit it, then people use that against you, and then you end up with global disruptions, unrest, and conflict, which is something that nobody wants. I mean, 25 years in the Army, over 5 years in a combat situation, nobody wants that. You don't want your kids to go there, but you need to be prepared for when and if it happens, because people make bad decisions, whether they're world leaders or the guy next door. As you think about where we are in the world, you can be very comfortable that the United States is strong and has great people at the helm. But as you frame your opinions and thoughts about things, think about both yourself and then all those around you. How do we make the best decisions to use our great power and resources to make the best for kind of everybody, right?
All right. Well, thanks for that, and thanks for being here, John. I really enjoyed it.
I did too, Dan. This went fast. It's too bad, but I'm looking forward to seeing you out in Vegas and having a little conversation there, and we'll have a couple of days to do that, so it'll be good.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
We will see you there.
Yeah.
All right.
Opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the contributor and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Stansberry Research, its parent company, or affiliates.